Alright, so now we've created the voice at the level of the vocal cords, and those sounds have resonated and bounced around through our oral cavity, but now we have to actually shape that sound into speech. And shaping this sound into speech happens through articulation. So articulation is very simply just movement, and when we talk about articulation for speech, it's the movement of the speech structures. And the movement of the speech structures are the lips, the teeth, the tongue, the hard palate, and the velum. So let's look at our picture over here and think about how we can shape our speech sounds according to how we move these structures. So if I'm just resonating the sound I've created at the level of the vocal cords, I have ah, and I can go ah 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 ah. And that's just changing my pitch of my voice and resonating that sound through my oral nasal cavities. But what we have to do to get speech is really shape those sounds using the tongue primarily against all of the articulating structures. So we have different parts of the tongue that we'll talk about in just a moment that are going to help create these sounds. We have the teeth here at the front of the mouth. Everybody knows what teeth are. And we have the lips. And we'll talk about how the tongue moves against the teeth and how the lips open and close. And we have the hard palate up here at the top and the soft palate here at the back. So our soft palate's what's going to move up and down and press against the tongue. So when we talk about articulation, we're talking about the oral side of the velum, not the nasal side like we did with the resonance. And when we talk about the hard palate, we'll talk about different sections of the hard palate and how the sections of the hard palate touch against the tongue as the tongue moves against it, and how that creates different sounds that we classify according to where they touch the palate. So looking in the mouth, we have the teeth up here at the front. We have the hard palate, and it's divided into two sections, the alveolar ridge, that bumpy area just behind the teeth, and then the hard palate itself, which is the remaining hard portion that's smooth at the top of the mouth, and then we have the soft palate, which is that soft, squishy portion. Then we have the tongue. We'll talk about the different sections of the tongue, and we have the lips. When we talk about the lips, we're really talking about the underlying muscles of the lips, which is formed by the orbicularis oris, and we can remember that because the orbicularis oris creates an O, and it also looks like an O and helps us open and close our lips for speech sounds. So the orbicularis oris gets innervation from the facial nerve, and the facial nerve is going to help us create those O's. And it also works with the trigeminal nerve that innervates the jaw muscles that open and close our jaw for things like when we say buy baby a bib. So articulation happens as we open and close our jaw for I, A, E, I, and then our lips open and close for articulation of B, B, I, B, A, B, E, A, B, I, B. So try that sentence, buy baby a bib, and feel how your tongue is moving up and down and what portions of the tongue are moving up and down as you talk. Next up we have the teeth. The teeth are rooted on the upper and lower jaw, so we have the maxilla, which is the upper jaw, and the mandible, which is the lower jaw. And we'll talk about in the articulation section a little bit about how the alignment of the teeth can affect articulation. But primarily, just looking at here, we have different types of alignments of teeth. And here we see that the maxilla and the mandible line up really well. Here we have a little bit more forward maxilla than the mandible, and it's a little bit more obvious with this one where the maxilla is more forward than the mandible here and how that affects the teeth lining up. And on this one, the mandible is more forward than the maxilla in this underbite. So let's start thinking about how our sounds can be affected by our teeth being more forward or more back. If our teeth are too far forward for sounds like S, for the S sound, then we might get a sound like sh. Or if our jaw is too far forward on the lower part, on the mandible, then how our T sound might sound t, t, versus t, t. So let's start thinking about how those things change and how we can relate that to our speech sounds in our future module. Next up we have the tongue. We have 3 different parts of the tongue: the tip, the body, and the root. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. And the root may also be called the base of the tongue. So for the tip of the tongue, it's the thinnest and most flexible part here, right at the front. And in our previous video we talked about the frenum. The frenum would attach to the floor of the mouth about right here, and to the part of the apex of the tongue, to keep the apex of the tongue kind of attached to the floor of the mouth so it's not flopping all over the place. Then we have the body of the tongue. This is our biggest portion of the tongue. It's really from here to here, and you can see there are lots of muscles that are underlying the apex and the body of the tongue, and that's so we can move the tongue in different ways. And then we have the root of the tongue, which is the very back portion here. Okay, and again we have lots of muscles underlying the tongue so that we can raise it up, or you can curl it, or you can make funny shapes with it. So let's talk about just very basically some structures that we use for the tongue for different speech sounds. So if we can imagine the roof of the mouth is here at the top. We have the alveolar ridge, part of the hard palate here at the front. We have the hard palate here, and we have the soft palate here in the back. Let's make the K sound. You can also make the G sound. And what you'll feel is the body of the tongue in the back touching against the oral side of the velum for g. When we think about the body of the tongue in the middle portion, it's really going to be more of the sides of the tongue for things like s or r, and how we're shaping that sound as it goes through. We also use the middle of the tongue for more of the vowels and things like E, where we rise that middle portion of the tongue up high, versus when the middle of the portion of the tongue is low. And then we have the apex, this tippy front part here, and it's going to touch against the alveolar ridge. It may go through the teeth for sounds like for our TH sound, the tongue goes through the teeth, or for our T sound, the tip of the tongue is going to touch the alveolar ridge. We can also make the D sound for like dog, where we have the tip of the tongue reaching up to touch the roof of the mouth at the alveolar ridge. And now you can see it a little bit better. We have again the apex, the body, and the root. Motor innervation for the tongue comes primarily from the hypoglossal nerve, and then we have innervation from the tongue also from the vagus nerve, but that's just for one muscle of the tongue. So if we think about these 2 nerves working together to help create all of those different speech sounds so that our tongue can reach up towards the roof of the mouth or go through the teeth or come towards the back towards the soft palate.